Get ready to move the conversation forward. This ain't your granddad's news and comment show. This is I Doubt It Podcast with Brittany Page and Jesse Dollemore.
All right, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Episode not yet known what number this will be. I am Jesse Dollemore, joined by your lovely, talented, and scholarly host, Brittany Page, but also new paperback edition of The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy, Robert P. Jones from the Public Religion Research Institute.
That's a mouthful, I know.
No, you just make me nervous. You make me very nervous, Robbie.
Friend of the show now, I think we can say.
I would like to think so.
Yeah. Third time.
Third time. You're practically a co-host. So we're here to celebrate the paperback release with a new afterword of the book.
Indeed.
And also, I don't know if you know, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but we are in the thick of a presidential election that is absolutely fueled by, on one side, by white supremacy. And you are our resident expert in both the roots of white supremacy and Christianity, but also just generally the morass that we find ourselves in with that particular topic. So again,
it's a little bit to talk about.
Hate to break it to you.
Yeah.
So with the afterword, what are you adding to the book? Because it's the new paperback, and I just want to say this was one of the most important books that I've read, so I definitely recommend it to everyone. What is the afterword telling us?
Oh, thank you. Well, as an author, you get like 1,500 words as a little opportunity to say, like, so what's going on since the book came out a year ago, right? And what do you want to say about what's going on? And you get, by the way, 1,500 words to do it, which is like 5 or 6 pages. So it's not a lot as you get to say. But it just became clear, to me that one of the things I needed to do is to say, all right, how does what's going on right now have to do with the 500-year stretch of history that I talked about in the book? Like, how is that showing up for us today? So the afterword really talks about the current threats that we're facing from white Christian nationalism, and how that has been with us throughout our history, and that this is really its current face, right? It's not new, and so I think to make that point is it's not new, and I trace the ways that this has been with us in various manifestations throughout American history. But right now, this is what it looks like, right? It looks like the threat of white Christian nationalism. So I use some very contemporary data to connect up this long historical trend and to show, it's right here with us today.
It's amazing to me that people they just don't automatically identify the parallels to what's taking place today with what's taken place in the past. I mean, people who watch The Watchmen on HBO, they're just learning about what took place in Greenwood with Black Wall Street. And you outline in the book cases of this type of race-related terror brought upon communities of color in Minnesota and in different communities. And we're witnessing, again, right now in Springfield, Ohio, not to the violence that has been visited upon marginalized communities, but
certainly threats of it.
It's just rhyming with what took place 80 years ago.
Yeah, well, and Springfield is not without its concrete. Like I said, we haven't had anybody killed, thank God, right? But we've had schools evacuated, things shut down, like
hospitals,
bomb threats. So the threat of violence has already been, instituted there, and it's kind of a powder keg.
Yeah, which is still terror. If you're trying to achieve a political objective through fear, that's terrorism, and it's just a repeat.
Yeah. No, that's right, and it's scapegoating, right? So, and it is this. It's racial, right? So we're not talking about Norwegian refugees, right? In Springfield, there are Norwegian immigrants that are a problem. It's lying, right? These are people who are here legally, right? In the U.S., right? So kind of lumping them in with a kind of problem that's talked about as being criminal, that's not at all what's
something J.D. Vance just admitted to yesterday. Absolutely, this is legal, but I'm going to keep calling it illegal immigrants.
Well, he's also given us a new. If we had Kellyanne Conway giving us alternative facts, 4 years ago, we've now got I'm just going to make up stories, right? From J.D. Vance, which I think is basically in the same vein, right? And it's just lying, scapegoating, and kind of leveraging this latent racism, right, in the country, and latent white supremacy, and fear, right, to kind of score some political points.
Are you shocked at all that it went from Lee Atwater, the Southern Strategy, and one of the kickoff events of Reagan's campaign in Hollywood, Mississippi? They chose that place to be a reason, but these were all relative, dog whistles. They've just shed the dog whistles, and now they've just picked up a megaphone, with the internet, and they broadcast their racism just unabashed. Is this at all surprising? I mean, no, it's disappointing.
Yeah.
But.
Well, I think one of the things that has happened in the Trump era is I do think we were moving as a country in a place where, like even Lee Atwater, right? I mean, one of the most chilling quotes from Atwater is him like overtly saying this famous quote, and I'm not going to say the words, right? You can't say the N-word. You can't say the N-word. We used to just be able to say N-word, 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 and people would, white Christians would react.
Right. Now you got to talk about busing and welfare.
Right.
And, yeah.
So you come up with these kind of pseudomonyms and immigration is a kind of way of doing that.
Absolutely.
As well too, at least the way that Trump is talking.
Well, again, because it's not Norwegian,
right.
It's not white Canadian immigration. It's black and brown people.
And let's not forget, I mean, this is crass, but I mean, Haiti was on the list of shithole countries.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Absolutely.
Right? That from Trump's mouth, right? Before. That's right. So,
and that was, by the way, not an invention of the media. That came from Lindsey Graham too.
Yeah,
I mean this is from Republicans acknowledging what took place in that White House meeting.
Yeah, that's right. So I think what Trump has done is I think the country was moving to a place where look, we have a set of kind of evolving norms that are around pluralism, that are like about moving away from segregation, away and accepting the civil rights movement as like a good thing for the country. And that Trump basically said actually, you don't have to go along with any of that, right? We can go back, to the way it was. And that, again, his little mantra, make America great again, is that last word that's got the power, right? It's not really about greatness or America. It's about a nostalgic, again, like we can go back to that time when white, straight, Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right, were in charge of everything, right? And that's America in that vision.
Right. There's also this debate about who is driving the violent rhetoric, right? You have Donald Trump blaming the Democrats, blaming Kamala Harris for the attacks on him. And then you have Democrats saying, well, you're actually the one, making racist comments and driving the threats that are happening in Springfield, Ohio. And there were interesting findings in the afterword about the worldview of white Christian nationalists and their views of violence and how it may sometimes be necessary. How do you see this debate over the political rhetoric driving the violence?
Well, there is a direct link. We can measure it, right, in public opinion surveys between holding a kind of Christian nationalist worldview, this idea that the U.S. should declare itself a Christian nation, that U.S. law should be based on the Bible, that if we lose our Christian faith, we won't have a country anymore. It's like those kinds of sentiments that we're measuring there. And so people who agree with that set of statements are much more likely to say that violence might be necessary, right? That the country's in such a bad place that resorting to political violence might be necessary to save the country. That's the way we asked about it in the survey. And we get about 3 in 10, right? People who hold that view. It's not a majority, but people who hold that view, it's about 1 in 3.
Certainly concerning.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't take that many, right? To get to violence. And so I think, if you think about it, if you do think that this country is essentially a promised land for European Christians, that's who the country is, and you see the country moving away from that with the demographic changes in the country, and you don't see any way that's rolling back, right? All the demographics point the same direction, increasing diversity in the country. White Christians today, by the way, make up 41%. If you put all groups together, like Protestant, Catholic, non-denominational, Orthodox, white non-Hispanic Christians are only 41% of the country today. And just 20 years ago, they were still a majority, right? So that's kind of what we're dealing with, is that change in the country.
That's also, I think it needs to be, that's a fundamentally different flavor of Christianity than black and brown Christianity.
Yeah.
The version, the doctrines that are practiced by black Christians or, Hispanic Catholics, it it's a different flavor than white evangelicalism.
Yeah. And one of the things like staring us right in the face in the data is really, you mentioned Reagan, right? And so Reagan was the one that really solidified the current composition of our political parties in terms of race and religion, right? So like my grandparents down in the South, they were all Democrats, right? White Southern Baptist Democrats, right? And what happened that by the time sort of I got into college, like our little Baptist college, we didn't even have a working college Democrat group, but there was a robust college Republican group on our little Baptist camp. So how did that happen, right? That all our grandparents were Democrats, and suddenly you can't even imagine being a Democrat, right? As a kind of young person in that environment in the 80s. And it basically was the civil rights movement. Right. And it's when the Democratic Party became identified with the civil rights movement, there was a great white Christian flight from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party that coalesced around Reagan. And what's remarkable in the data is that you can actually, if you want to sum up the voting patterns of Americans from 1980 on, right? So that's now a sweep of 40 years. You could essentially boil it down to this, that majorities of white Christians vote for Republicans and majorities, basically everybody else, votes for Democrats, right, in the presidential elections. And we still see that pattern today. It's white evangelicals that stand out. They're like 85% in for Trump. And by the way, we see no attrition whatsoever, right? Yeah. Didn't see it in 2020. We don't see it today. But other white...
What's the percentage you said?
It's like 85%.
Okay.
Like, you know,
so that comprises, on a national scale, roughly that 32 to 38% bottom of his approval rating never goes...
Yeah, that's the floor.
That's it.
They are providing the floor.
So is that the floor pretty much?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, because he and his approval rating is in the 70s as well. Like, so it's not just that pragmatic voting, but even you ask, do you have a favorable view of Donald Trump? It's like more than 70% of white evangelicals say yes, they have a favorable view of the man, right? Not just they're going to vote for him.
And it's shocking in numerous ways, right? Because he doesn't have strongly held religious views. I mean, 2 Corinthians, it's a Bible. I mean, there's so many references, right? But even his inconsistent positions on abortion, right? Where he has come out and said that, you know, there needs to be something more than 6 weeks when he's talking about abortion bans. And then they're like, hey, you need to reel it in because this is going to upset anti-abortion activists. He's not consistent in his views, you would think, in aligning with white Christian nationalists, and yet this support remains. Yeah. What explains that? Help us.
I think that actually gives the game away, right? And so Time Magazine published recently an excerpt of the afterword here, but I put it into contemporary context and I actually used this example, like what is going on, right? That you've got the top of the Republican ticket, like saying, well, one, he removed the pro-life stance from the Republican Party platform, right? So that's not even that's been in the platform again for 40 years. The Republican Party has been for a national ban on abortion. And it was because of a professed belief that life begins at conception. And if that's what you really believe, that's the logical policy outcome. And Donald Trump essentially just stripped that out of it hasn't been in the platform. In 2020, they didn't even have a platform. So they said like, yeah, whatever that guy believes is what we're for. This time they had this abbreviated one, but it's stripped out. It's now the back to the states, but that's not the pro-life position. Do you think
that's because there's been a strategy shift where people like Ralph Reed and the late Jerry Falwell, and now the latest version of Jerry Falwell, Jerry Falwell Jr., that they realize that in order to gain political power and have any efficacy in their movement, they're going to have to sacrifice a little bit? I mean,
I guess, but I mean, can you imagine? Like, that was like the sacrosanct, non-negotiable issue, right?
That's my religious tradition. My parents are still no exceptions. Like, you get raped.
And it was the reason you could never vote for a Democrat in that worldview, right? It was the reason, right? And
One issue voters.
Yeah, and that issue is sort of gone now. But so I think the reason I say it gives up the game is that because I think so what's the glue then that's holding conservative, white, evangelical, and other white conservative Christians to Trump? It's clearly not abortion, right? I mean, so that's been taken off the table. So what is it? And what does he talk about all the time? It's immigration, right? So it's race and sort of Christian nationalism. It's that cocktail that is really the glue. And now I think Trump sort of ripped the cover off of that, and it's just obvious because that's what he's leading with every time he gets on the stump.
I talk about there being little daylight between, there's not much of a gulf between Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism. Yeah. Do you find in your studies and in your observations that because I'm curious about it, like David Barton, you know who he is.
Yep.
For the audience, he's a guy who makes insane claims that can be easily disproven about the role that Christianity and the actual Bible in Deuteronomy had in the writing and the organizing of our government, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And do you see that there's becoming like, do you agree that there's little difference between Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism? And why is it that you agree with me so much on that?
Yeah, David Barton. I'm not going to go down that road, but I mean, he's like even fabricates quotes, right, to make that worldview.
He, by the way, is sense. An inspiration to Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson constantly talks about David Barton being like, my work in my life is very much motivated by David Barton and his theories.
Oof. Yeah,
it's for sure dangerous.
Yeah. So what we did when we tried to measure Christian nationalism in our survey, I mean, one of the things about a public opinion survey is you have to actually measure it concretely. You can't just sort of do it in a fuzzy way. So we had these very specific statements, and we intentionally left race out, right? So we just asked things like, U.S. law should be based on the Bible. The U.S. should declare itself a Christian nation, right? Those kinds of Christians should exercise dominion over other people in the country, right? Those kinds of questions. And so those didn't mention race explicitly. And we did that on purpose so we could get a clean measure of just the Christian nationalist, kind of dominionist part of the worldview. But then when we go to cross-reference it with other attitudes about race, they are so highly correlated, right? In fact, the connection, again, statistically, between holding like harsh anti-immigrant, racist attitudes and Christian nationalism are really, really high, right? And they're actually a little stronger even than the connection to abortion, when you actually measure it on public opinion surveys. So that's how you can tell the work that whiteness, right, does in that Christian nationalist view, even when you're not measuring it directly, but then as soon as you start correlating it, what does it correlate it to? It correlates to holding anti-Semitic attitudes. It correlates to holding anti-immigrant attitudes. And I'm talking about things like that racist great replacement theory, and saying that, we should, not only should we build a wall, but we should put barriers like, as Governor Abbott did in Texas, that might kill or maim people. Right. They're on board with that. Right. It's that kind of views against.
You're booby trapping the Rio Grande.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it seems to be, when Donald Trump says that we're going to not have a country anymore, or we're going to lose our country, that people should really be hearing that as the racist statement that it is, because he's making a claim about the demographic shift that you were just talking about earlier. Is that how you see it?
I do. And I think it's really worth paying attention every time Donald Trump uses the kind of plural possessive our to just stop, right?
Who's the we he's talking about?
Who's the we? Yeah. Who's the our? What's his audience? And, when he makes those kinds of statements, and, again, I also think the kind of a good Rosetta Stone for understanding that plural possessive thing with Trump is the speech he made to the National Religious Broadcasters meeting back in March or late February of this year. Because that's a group of all kind of evangelical kind of communicator power brokers, right? And that these are the televangelist stations and the radio, Salem Radio, and all that kind of network of leaders. And there, he also said that the biggest thing wrong with the country is that we have to bring back our religion. Mm-hmm. So, that's how, we have to bring it back, and then we're going to restore your power.
And that's not a different our. It's our religion, our country, white people.
Yeah. And he wasn't saying that when he did that sit down with the National Black Journalists Association,
right,
he wasn't using our, right, in that way with that group, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really worth paying attention to. When does he use that? When does he not? It's pretty obvious who the our is.
That actually reminds me of a J.D. Vance quote from this week that you might appreciate. So he said, we don't want to force our faith on anybody. What we want is to recognize and to have motivate us the faith that I think is the source of all great truth in human history, and especially in this country, that we want our public policy to be motivated by the wisdom of loving thy neighbor. Does that seem true of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, loving my neighbor, yeah. Maybe not bearing false witness against your neighbor might be a good a good one. And maybe Jesus' question, who is, or the question got asked to Jesus actually in the text, who is my neighbor?
Yeah.
As if it was a kind of rhetorical question, right? Maybe that question back to Vance is like, aren't the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, like your neighbor? And might you not want to lie about them in a way that puts their lives at risk? I mean, I'm all for J.D. Vance taking up love your neighbor. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that would be great, right? But you can't say love your neighbor, lie about them in a way that puts their lives in danger and pretend that's the gospel.
Do you think that that's signaling to the white Christian nationalists? I mean, who do you think that message was for? Because it seems like we can all kind of see what's happening here and who that is, not directed at. But he seems to be using religion to try to appeal to someone. Is it the white Christian nationalists?
Oh, I think pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
And it's also just trying to, when you have such harsh rhetoric that he's been using and Trump has been using, I mean, so not forget, like, Trump has been using not just harsh language, but like Nazi language, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Let's be clear, right? When he talks about
vermin, blood of the country,
poisoning the blood of the country, I mean, that you could literally lift that out of the pages of Mein Kampf, right? I mean, I actually went and looked and was like, oh yeah, that exact phrase is like in that, is in Mein Kampf, right? So it's Nazi language that that's
by design.
Absolutely.
People who say, well, it's an accident, that absolutely is by design. I mean, probably straight out of the mind of Stephen Miller, that particular line, because they know who they're appealing to.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It has a history. And even like, so, and the other piece that like mystified me for a little bit, and I finally got like, oh, wait, that's what's going on, is this bizarre thing that Trump does. He talks about Hannibal Lecter on the stump. Yeah. Right. And like, when does he do that? And when you look at when he does that, he does it in proximity talking about immigrants. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the implication is, right, and it's usually like, and who are they letting into our country? It's criminals, it's serial killers. And then like 2 minutes ago, he talked about Hannibal Lecter. And so like that little connection is stitched together in the minds of his, so this sense of like literally serial killers who are cannibalistic is what the picture he's trying to paint. And it's very similar to the eating your pets.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, and it's a politics of disgust is really what he's after. And this is straight out of the fascist authoritarian playbook. And so you can't be a purveyor of the politics of disgust and talk about loving your neighbor at the same time, right? But I think it's a cleanup effort. It's really a cover-up effort to kind of flower over some, let's talk about love of neighbor a little bit, but never take your foot off the gas at the same time. It's a smokescreen, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of the same deal as saying peacefully and patriotically while inciting an insurrection against the country. So he has that plausible deniability. Yeah, but I said peacefully and patriotically. What do you mean? Yeah. It's kind of the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you've had a year to be talking about this book, and I was actually listening to your new podcast because you launched a podcast, and it is the Convocation Unscripted, right?
That's right. Yep.
And I heard you say on there a statement, and well, it reminded me of part of the conversation we had last time you were on talking about this book, because I can't imagine that some Christians are taking the lessons from this book well, right? That the roots of white supremacy come from religion. Yeah. And you actually made a comment saying, talking about your book and the 1-year anniversary and the new paperback coming out, kidnapping and enslavement done in the name of Christ and the church, right? Talking about slavery. How has it been the past year talking about the lessons from this book and the roots of white supremacy coming from religion? Has that been difficult? Have there been difficult conversations you've had? Has it been well received? Just what has the experience been with that? Yeah. I'm curious.
Well, it's been clear that, you all have these conversations a lot too, right? That people are in different places on a journey on this. Totally. And I've tried to remember, one, I'm on a journey, right, in this conversation. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have been in a different place, right, on this. This was trying to remember that. And there were plenty of times like writing this book, because, I grew up Southern Baptist, evangelical in the South. I mean, I have Southern Baptist, I went to Southern Baptist College. I have a Southern Baptist seminary degree. I went to a Methodist college for my PhD. Like, it's deep in me. Like, these are my family, my people, right?
Still a Christian.
And still a Christian. Yeah. So it's deeply personal, right, to me. And so I always try to remember, too, that there were moments like writing the book where I just had to like push away from the desk and go for a walk. You know, like it was just too much. So I've tried to remember, like, I've had those moments, and you can clearly see sometimes when I'm speaking or something, people kind of at that space. And I often talk about that to say, look, there's going to be some challenging things we're talking about. If you're feeling stressed about that, like, that's okay. If you're feeling uncomfortable, that's okay. But just try to kind of sit with it, right? Let it be. Just imagine it sitting beside you, right? The discomfort, just kind of let it be there, and like, let's hold on to it and see where it goes.
You go into therapist mode. That's what I'm hearing.
Second, you're going to be in competition with us in podcast space. You're going to be in competition with Brittany in the therapist space.
I guess that's right. Yeah, but it's how to kind of, you know, because and I sometimes give the example of this, like, so I'm a survivor of colon cancer.
Wow.
Me too.
All right. Yeah. And
2 years ago.
Yes, I was 10 out for me. What I remember, though, right, anyone who's had that experience with cancer, you know, the treatment, pretty tough, right?
Yeah.
And so why do you sign up for that hard treatment? And the reason is because you think there's health on the other side of it, right? Otherwise, you'd never do it. And so part of, like, for me, like, struggling through this difficult history, wrestling with it, you know, it's painful, it's embarrassing, it's shocking, but, like, why is it worth doing? Because I think it's the only way to health on the other side. And I think there's been a lot of people who are like, so it's like the chemo, right? In some ways, right? That you have to get through to get to health.
Right.
And because this stuff is in our DNA, it really is. And so it's that deep in us. And I think I've probably been in now 200 churches. And like, I get university speaking engagements, but I am always happy to get like a church engagement that, like, we want to, and they're usually predominantly white, you know, churches that are saying, like, yeah, we know we need to talk about this, so come have a conversation with us because we're kind of on this journey. This will be a step on the journey for us.
That's very cool.
So how is that's like professionally with reasonable people? What do your DMs look like?
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, we know we get our death threats.
Sure.
I mean, you're in our home right now. We've got a security system that's more than it should be.
Yeah.
You had to come through a metal detector, you know.
Yeah, right.
Are you getting the kind of vitriol and hatred, or is your analysis too highbrow that you're under the radar for them?
I mean, it comes and goes, right? Depending on what's going on. You've had some protests at some events, but nothing too scary. And we certainly get our share of mail, you know, coming through and the inbox, you know, that kind of thing. But I mean, thankfully, it's been nothing too scary. You know, just some people get banned from Facebook from time to time after they get reported by me. But you know, for actual, like, threats of violence, that kind of thing. But it's few and far between, really. I'm actually happy to say.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think we asked you this last time, but you've, you know, had a year to reflect on
Yeah.
all of this. Are you feeling optimistic as the election approaches, and with what we're facing in the country and the division, are you feeling optimistic?
Like today?
It is how it is, isn't it?
It is kind of
Generally
how it is.
speaking.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is how it is.
Just sometimes you push away from the desk and just go take a nap.
Sometimes, yeah, right.
You have to.
So, you know, I think where I feel hopeful is, you know, in the book, like, I write about Tulsa and Duluth, Minnesota, and the Mississippi Delta, and the time I spent with those folks who were, you know, these are everyday people, they're not in like liberal, you know, Vermont. Like, I mean, these are most of them red areas of the country, you know, very conservative, and yet are finding ways to do work on the ground that is about telling the truth and repairing the damage from kind of white supremacy and what it's wrought in their community, and finding ways to do that with very little resources. And when I get invited, to a Baptist congregation in Kentucky to come talk about, and they actually put the name of the book with the words white supremacy on the marquee out in the front lawn, which I don't think 20 years ago would have happened, right?
Wow.
They might have said, Robert Jones, come and talk about race and religion, right? You know, but actually put like the words white supremacy on their church marquee. That's new, right? And so I am hopeful about that at the local level. I sometimes despair if I just pay attention to the national level, but I think at the local level, I actually think there's more hopeful stuff going on that ever gets kind of percolates up.
And that is where real change begins.
Yeah, that's right.
It has to begin there.
Right.
Yeah. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your podcast because it's relatively new.
Yeah.
And what is the premise? You have co-hosts. You have 3 co-hosts, right?
It's a party. Yeah. So, this came out of a kind of organic set of friendships. So I've teamed up with Kristen Dumais, author of Jesus and John Wayne.
Very popular book.
Jamar Tisby, author of The Color of Compromise, and a new book out called The Spirit of Justice. And Diana Butler Bass, who's author of Freeing Jesus and like 20 other books. It's interesting. So we
Does it make you feel lazy?
Yeah, that's a little bit. So we're friends, and so it actually started as kind of a Substack conversation. So we were kind of trading kind of things on Substack. We all have Substack newsletters, and decided, maybe we should do like a little digest where we kind of feature. So we kind of launched the Convocation on Substack, and then we were like, but wait, now we're having so much fun, we should talk, right? And so we launched it as a YouTube channel called the Convocation Unscripted, where every other week, so we're on that kind of biweekly schedule. It's unscripted, so we literally turn it on, and we haven't gamed it out. And so we just say, we try to be true to form, and we just trade who's going to keep the conversation going and play host for the day, but it rotates. And it's kind of whatever somebody wants to throw on the table, that's where the conversation goes, and it's about 40 minutes of that between the 4 of us. And then we've now launched it into a full-fledged audio podcast as well.
Very cool. Yep. Yeah, I listened to, I don't know if it's the most recent one, but the one on abortion. And it was a really interesting conversation. And it's listening to 4 super smart people talk about important issues. Who doesn't want to listen to that?
So a lot different
I get
this.
smarter by sitting there, right? And getting to listen to Jamar and Kristen and Diana talk. So it's great. Yeah.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, listen, I would recommend everybody go out. If you haven't already gotten this, this is a game changer book that has information that will rock your world beyond the things that, the Tulsa, Greenwood, Black Wall Street stuff, that kind of thing, in stories you've never heard before. And also it's important just to learn this information to be able to go into metaphoric battle against people who don't have the facts and are trying to dumb us down and change our history. It is important work, and we, as always, we very much appreciate you and the podcast. Yeah. The Convocation Unscripted on YouTube. All of this will be linked below. Anything else you want to?
Well, I just want to say thank you for your work too. Glad to be back on. I'm going to proudly claim friend of the show.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me back.
Anytime.